Okay, so welcome to our series on fertility. And I'm Kate Godley. I'm physician assistant and founder of the Functional Medicine Center. And Mohita Patel and I are working on this series on fertility, but I do believe that a lot of the information that you're going to hear here will actually apply to all populations across the board. It just so happens that as we're thinking about having children, sometimes we take a step back and reevaluate some of the choices we're making in our lives. So today we have Dan Swim, and he is co-founder of Candle Science, a local Durham company that he's going to tell us more about, and also in charge of product development. And he's also founder of his latest project, which is Grow. And in researching Grow, Dan has done extensive travel and research and interviewing of people in the fragrance industry who are really the experts on what is in all the fragrances and the products that we are often exposed to. So I will let Dan tell us a little bit more about Grow, if you'd like first, and then we'll go from there. So thanks for coming on, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. My father was a chemist in the candle industry. And so that's kind of what got my brother and I into the candle industry originally, which is the impetus for Candle Science. More recently with Grow is an all natural home fragrance brand. But the kind of unifying theme with both companies that I've over the past 15 years really gotten pretty deeply engaged in is around fragrance and fragrance safety. The home fragrance it's unfortunate because it kind of lives between food, which is regulated by the FDA, and cosmetic products, which are regulated by the FDA, and then the EPA, which regulates kind of outdoor air quality. But there's nobody that really regulates, home fragrance. And so, unfortunately, because that's been the case, a lot of companies have used the lack of regulation and even the lack of transparency. They're not even required to tell you what's in a fragrance to create some fragrances that are really not so good for people and not the kind of things that you'd want in your house. And so both companies are really about making fragrances safer and trying to bring awareness to what can be put in a fragrance and kind of how to avoid that.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me because it's a lot like with the supplement industry, where there's a lot of argument going on about who's supposed to be regulating some of it.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, I would be happy for that. We're even worse than that because no one's seemingly even stepping up to the plate. I think supplements are big enough to get some attention. Home fragrance is getting very little, and so it's really requires consumers to be even more informed about those choices, and not just for the fragrances that are in home fragrance products, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I want to, maybe I'll use fragrance, maybe I won't, but just the fragrances that are in, everything else, soaps, lotions, hotel rooms, fragrances that you really can't even avoid.
yeah, so I was thinking recently too about fragrances in like your dishwashing, like if you put a pod in your
Oh
dishwasher.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so do you want to speak for a minute to what you've learned about like the top toxins in our typical household products? I know in the past we've used some brand names when we talk off camera,
Sure.
but you don't have to use brands, but
No,
just
no, no.
some,
I'm happy to kind of, yeah.
yeah.
So speaking specifically about the risks, and there's been, the good news is, as I said, the bad news is that there's not any really regulation, and there's not even any really transparency around these things on the consumer side. There is a little bit of good news, though. About 5 years ago, there was the United States adopted a program which is from the UN originally, and from WHO, the World Health Organization, actually kind of helped administer, around the health hazards of all chemicals. And it's actually, weirdly, it's a transportation and logistics, and OSHA, like workplace safety, is who actually enforces these rules. Which you think, well, why is that? How is that applicable to a consumer? The thing of it is that information is available on websites and is available through this this information sharing requirement, even though it's not meant to be consumer facing. Kind of smart consumers can use it. And so I kind of joke it's like getting Al Capone on mail fraud. Using these logistics rules can actually help inform consumers, by them paying attention to what, in my opinion, should be consumer facing disclosures about, what's in materials and what the safety risks are. But so anyway, this program, this WHO program, defines 13 different health endpoints, health safety endpoints. And so I kind of like to group them into 3 different kind of subgroups. The first group is stuff that is not terribly dangerous. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's not terribly dangerous. Things like eye irritation and skin irritation. These are things that are pretty typical. People are pretty used to. The issues are not that severe, and so they're on this list, and they should be taken into account, especially people with allergies or really sensitive skin. But they're not going to cause really adverse effects to people. The second is things that are really bad, but only if you use them in a really, bad way. If a kid takes something and drinks it, and those are the acute toxins. And again, problematic, but most people are not going to pull out a candle and eat it. So that's not terrible. The third group is the group that I find the most troubling, and that's the what are called CMRs: carcinogens, mutagenics, and reproductive toxins. And that's the stuff that, I've got 2 kids. I just wouldn't want that in my house. I've got, a wife and a family and animals, and I just wouldn't want those things in the house. And they can cause, reproductive problems, and they can cause, cancer problems. And they are in fragrances. And so, that's the kind of stuff that we really that we eliminate from our fragrances, and we really try to educate people on doing that as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So I was just going to mention I'm taking a class right now on toxins from my functional medicine degree, and Dina Minnick is the professor. She's got like a PhD in nutrition. But one of the things she pointed out this week that I think is really important to note is, in the past, some of these ingredients might not have been as awful because your overall toxic burden wasn't as high, but
Yep.
that it can be like the straw that broke the camel's back, where if you actually drew out your toxic timeline, which would include everything you've been exposed to since birth, it gets to the point where one tiny little exposure can kind of put you like over the edge. So
yeah, no, it's an absolutely great point. And it actually dovetails really nicely because this modeling, this way to model toxicology that I've been discussing, they just now in the last year changed it to take a comprehensive model, so that they're not looking at every different fragrance and material or individually, but the cumulative effect of all these different materials. And it's absolutely right. There's one kind of simple formula for safety, and it's basically the risk of something times the hazard, meaning what is the likelihood and what is the amount that you'll be exposed to it. And obviously if you're encountering these materials at home, that's one thing, but if you're encountering them at work, in your car, all these things are cumulative, and that's how your body experiences these toxins. And so that's very reasonably the way that they should be kind of modeled and thought about.
yeah, and we're going to do another talk on polymorphisms, but I'm also studying how our genetics, obviously, in a way, our genetics are getting worse as a population. And so more and more mutations are making it harder for us to detox every day. And we're living longer with these mutations.
Well, yeah, there's this kind of like environmental foil to evolution, and genetics. And we have, all these positive things going on about, with how our bodies develop and adapt. And yet all of a sudden we've got all these man-made materials that can kind of foil our body's ability to do those things. And yeah, it's why I think it pays to be thoughtful about the cumulative effect of all these materials. And it doesn't have to be, absolutely zero, but you don't want to, get too caught up in that. But it's something that you ought to control and where you can, for sure.
And then kind of bringing it back to more plain language in terms of, if you're looking for, say, for example, like at work, we want to have a room spray in the bathroom just so that like employees and patients can feel comfortable coming in and out. And so are there certain things that you would just absolutely never purchase because you're like, oh, that room spray has this in it, and that's
Yeah. I'm happy. So I think there's like three different ways to look at this based on like increasing levels of detail. I think, the problem is that people want a simple takeaway from what is actually super complex chemistry. You've got, 30 or 40 raw materials in a fragrance. That fragrance is going into, a soap or a lotion or a spray or a candle that's got more ingredients. You've got, the chemistry of those things together. And then you've got polymorphism and things like that going on. And so I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed with that. And so I'll offer kind of three different ways of one is super quick and easy. The other is kind of a mid-level amount of research, and one is kind of a deep dive. I think the simplest way to do it is to stick to the brands that people trust for good reason. Brands like, Burt's Bees and Seventh Generation, they were really the pioneers in bringing products like this into the mainstream. From the best of my knowledge, and I've looked into it a lot, they do it the right way. They really do put in the work and the time and the research to do it the right way. That's with Grow Fragrance, the home fragrance brand. Those have been inspiration brands for us. And we've been fortunate enough to work with some of the same people because their leadership team has been based in local to me, to us. And so yeah, the simplest thing would be, pick a handful of brands that have, a well-earned, old reputation for being really, handling these things the proper way and with integrity. And those would be a couple of the brands that I would recommend. Second level of detail would be to use sites like EWG. If your viewers are familiar with that, that's an online an app-based kind of database. It's a not-for-profit third party that evaluates both products and also ingredients. And they do a pretty good job. They're not perfect, but they do a pretty good job of giving people the information. So if you're looking for a brand or you don't like the offerings and you see some options out there, but you really want to be concerned, that's a great place to look. The third place, which would be the deepest dive, is what I was talking about before with these SDS sheets. If you Google, if you want to know, like, hey, Febreze, is it really safe? You can Google, Febreze and the fragrance name and the SDS sheet, and they provide it. And it's not meant for the consumer, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And if you look into that, obviously that could be a whole nother session as to, what to look for. But like, if you see words like carcinogen and reproductive toxin, you probably, I wouldn't want those types of products. And so, but yeah, those three ways. Brands are the easiest and simplest. EWG is a good middle of the road where you can do some due diligence, but it's meant for consumers. And the SDS is really, looks at exactly what's going on with this material, with this product, and lets you know what's in it by law. And the great part about that law is that they're forced by the federal government to disclose that. Again, not to consumers, but in the age of the internet, consumers can get that information.
It's interesting because when I was a kid, I read every label of everything, including all the inactive ingredients. And my mom would joke, like, you're going to be a chemistry major.
Yeah.
And I was.
Yeah.
Like, I would look up, sodium lauryl sulfate. How is that different than sodium laureth sulfate? And it actually is different.
Oh,
and,
yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. But also recently, actually in the last couple of years, you said something to me about the brand Method, and I went and researched more about Method, and I decided we weren't buying any more Method products. So kind of like an out there, don't just trust them just because the label looks nice.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, two quick things. One, going back to your label, obviously label reading is huge and is paramount. And it'll help you with a lot of products, certainly with food and with personal care and cosmetics. The problem with fragrance in particular is that they just say fragrance, and
Yeah.
that's it. And whether it's one benign material or 40 cancer causing reproductive toxins, they can say fragrance, and that's the law. And so unfortunately on that, you've got to dig one level deeper. But as to Method, and Mrs. Myers, those types of brands, they want to position themselves through their labeling and through some very kind of carefully chosen words, to give people an impression that the product is either safer or more natural than it really is. I really encourage people to look for two things that are really tough to cheat: are 100% plant-based or 100% natural. And are two good things to look for on, if you're looking for a natural or a plant-based product. And then non-toxic or toxin-free are really good things to look for on the safety side. Natural doesn't necessarily mean non-toxic. I think a lot of people think that that's the case, and you squeeze something from the woods, it may or may not be safe. And so I would look for both. And with those brands, you'll see, Mrs. Myers does some crafty things where they'll say, made with essential oils, and you think that sounds pretty good. But the problem is they can put one drop of essential oil in a synthetic fragrance and say made with essential oils. And again, because the labeling laws are not that stringent, they can get away with that. So I like, absolute language, absolute claims: 100% natural, 100% plant-based, non-toxic, toxin-free. Those are the things that when you say them, you have to be able to back them up. And even though the government isn't enforcing that all that strongly, companies are suing each other, and that is helping to suss this stuff out.
Yeah, one way that the lawyers are helping, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of an eye roll, but when they go after those people for those things, it's probably for the public good.
Yeah. And so one last thing about the fragrance. So, I mean, we also hear that essential oils, to me, you've now concentrated a part of the plant. So if there were heavy metals in the plant, do you also have a chance of having heavy metal actually in the essential oil? Do you know
Yeah,
that?
so again, complicated. So essential oils are not all made the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Some are steam distilled, some are molecularly distilled, some are enfleurage, some are solvent extracted. Some of those methods allow for materials to come through the process, some of them don't. And so, yeah, it's an issue. And it's an issue where that's where I would there is testing that can find those things out. A lot of people use it. A lot of those brands that I suggested use it. A lot of them don't.
Yeah.
I personally, I wouldn't buy essential oils on Amazon. I probably wouldn't even buy essential oils from a big box retailer that didn't have really, really stringent testing. So yeah, that's an issue as well. I think that sadly, the carcinogenic, mutagenic issues are reproductive problems are more probably likely to cause problems, but it's absolutely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I'm going to be handing people that go through the series, I'm going to be handing them a PDF that's got like, these are the things I want you to really avoid, kind of like the
Yep.
most common. But I guess my last comment was just, did you get into a lot of this and learning more about safety and health and the environment before kids, or did having your kids kind of motivate you?
No, it was kind of both. I kind of, my situation is unique in that I encountered this stuff with my work, not really anticipating encountering it, and it was like, oh man, like that's we can't do that. That's not okay. You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. I can still hear my mother telling me that, and so in that way we were part of the solution. But I do know from our own personal experience with two kids, and then also hearing from a million customers that couples getting pregnant and women getting pregnant is probably the number one impetus for these types of changes. And I've heard this story so many times. A woman goes to her doctor and they say, oh yeah, you can't eat lunch meat and you can't have this stuff. And their doctor tells them, like, here's a dozen things that are in your home, goat cheese and medicines and stuff that is a part of their daily life, where their doctor says, this is not part of a healthy, reproductive process. And they're really freaked out. And it's a really fair position to take. And so, especially in the age of the internet, they log on and they see, all these other things. And it's this, child rearing and bearing is such a selfless act. And I always joke that's kind of where it begins, when you start having to take care of your body and your home in a new way, with your eyes open to these materials. And then of course you have the child and you think, well, I'm not going to go back, then you've got a baby in the
Unlearn
house.
all of the things you've learned.
Yeah, like you can't unsee that stuff. And so,
Yeah.
I do. I think it can also kind of similarly happen if people have, God forbid, a cancer diagnosis, later in life. I see that as another big impetus to think about this stuff. But without a doubt, wanting to get pregnant, getting pregnant, having a baby, these are the big, opportunities to really be thoughtful about this kind of stuff in your life.
Yeah, and I mean, my story is a little different in that the autoimmune diagnoses in my family motivated me to learn, because
Yeah.
everyone in the conventional medicine kept saying there's nothing in the environment causing these autoimmune diseases. And I was like, no, that seems wrong. Like, there just seems to be like there's more information. So, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
as a healthcare provider, it makes sense that you're proactive about it. And that's great. And that's certainly preferred. But a lot of people, it doesn't affect them until it affects them personally. And that's, the more typical story. But yeah, it's one of those things where, what does it hurt? What does it hurt to if something might be a carcinogen, then I can live without it, and that's the good news is with all these new brands starting up and EWG and people like that sharing this information, there are options out there. And so, why not take the little bit of time and seek out these things? And generally it's kind of a side benefit, and it's not exactly what we're talking about now, but these companies and these brands that do this sort of work, they're generally just better anyway. They're more thoughtful about the sustainability of their product. They're more thoughtful about the wages they pay their employees and their workers. And so generally the people that think about this sort of stuff think about everything a little bit more deeply and are generally better options anyway.
Yeah, and I think in general, we feel like, I know me and Josh feel better about spending money on something, and we're saving money elsewhere. Like, the truth is we're saving money in our health care costs.
Sure.
And we're saving money because we also often use less of a product because we're just so much more aware now. So
yeah, I always say, some of these products cost the same, some do cost more, but I always say, can just consume less, don't cut corners, don't buy more and cut corners, buy less. And if that means, somebody not buying a product from me, great, parlay that into something else, but this is important enough to do it wherever, your budget capabilities are.
that gave me a great idea, which is we're going to take a picture of the shopping cart filled with all the conventional cleaning products, and we're going to show them how you can just do it with so many less products.
Oh yeah. Patagonia ran a great Black Friday ad a couple of years ago. They're like, don't buy any of our stuff, just go outside. And that's a great, that's a great option. These are, there's certain things in your life that food and cosmetics and stuff that you need. There's other stuff that make people happy. And that's great. But if you're mindful about what you need, and you're mindful about, when you need or want something, who you get it from, I think you can do both.
Yeah. Awesome, Dan. Well, I know how busy you are, so I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your having me, and always looking to try to get this message out to people. So happy to do it.
And I'm going to link to both Candle Science and Grow. And I love, like, when you click on Grow's website, you can actually see the ingredients. Like right now I have the ginger pumpkin air fabric freshener up, but you can give me a more recent one if you want to too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We launch seasonal fragrances every year, and it's crazy. It was like we were not well received in the fragrance world by sharing raw materials. Fragrance houses were all freaking out, and we're like, you know, hey, this is the future. You're going to have to deal with this. Like, start now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can go with any product, and certainly ours. You can take those products, you know, and check them out on EWG, individual raw materials, and really see. But that's probably the best place for people to really see if a product measures up.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, if you hold on one second, I'm going to stop the recording, and then I have one more thing to ask you before you go.
Sure.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Thanks.